Hi YouTube, this is Siavash from Netherlands. I'm going to upload a series of tutorials on photography, and it starts with how to see. Photographer should seize first and then compose the image. So what should we see first? The, the thing that we should see is elements of design. Lines, shapes, forms. Lines make shapes, and shapes in 3D environment makes forms. And the number of elements of design are are more than 3. But we are going to investigate these 3 at first in this episode. We will talk about the other elements of design later in the next episodes. So lines can be vertical, horizontal, and diagonal. And for photographer, maybe diagonal lines is the most important one. Why? Because it makes sense of movement. A picture is something static. It's two-dimensional. It has no movement, it has no depth. But if you make some sense of movement or illusion of movement or sense of depth or illusion of depth, you make interest. That is why we are going to talk about depth of field later in this episode, but movement is made by diagonal lines. Again, diagonal lines, sense of movement. But this does not mean horizontal lines or vertical lines are not important. Horizontal lines give you sense of stability, and in some circumstances they are more desired than diagonal lines. Horizontal lines. Again, vertical lines are usually used to show the height. If something is tall, you should show it with vertical lines to show the height. Or lines can be various combination of different lines. The first 2 lines coming to this eyes is this staircase and these lines. Of course, we have lines on the roof as well, but the first thing that eyes see is these lines, and we have these lines. We have vertical lines, we have movement in the picture. We have movement, we have interest. And lines are sometimes used to just lead the eyes towards the subject. The lines can be a road, or can be some Photoshop effect, or some other photography effect. But lines leads the eyes, and where we want to lead the eye, usually towards the subject. And lines makes shapes: square, rectangle, circles, triangles, or combination of the various shapes. So when you see a rectangle, square, or circle, or a shape, that can be a good shot, and you may like to include it in your picture. Rectangles again. And the thing that I want to highlight is the shapes are not the shapes do not have to be exactly precise. Approximation is also works. This is not mathematics, this is approximation, this is art. So if it's kind of a square or kind of rectangle, it's acceptable. And squares, in this shot we can see the doorway is a square shape, or this turtle is on a square board floating on the water. Or we have various shapes, so you can see that maybe the most important shapes are these rectangles or squares. Of course, we have shapes here, or walls, or breaks also are shapes, but these are just highlights. Again, we want to take a photo of a place, we want to take the shapes. So think of shapes. We have a number of shapes in this picture. I just highlighted a couple, but we have plenty of shapes in this picture. So photographer should see the shapes. Or here again we have shapes. It's not precisely rectangle, but the roof is kind of rectangle. And again shapes. And of course we have shapes more than these 4 elements, but these are just highlights. We also have the roof is also has a kind of a squarey shape. And some shapes are just weird. I mean, it's just combination of a couple of shapes, a number of shapes. And forms. So we saw that lines making shapes, and shapes next to each other together makes forms. So how these shapes are arranged on top of each other, and the form, so we have a vertical form, vertical line, vertical form. We want to show the height. Again, forms. The two previous forms were just simple forms. We sometimes have more complex forms, as sometimes it's desired to have just simple forms, but sometimes complex forms are more desired. This staircase is kind of not very straight. A pedestrian should get down and turn, and we have kind of curve form. So when you put this photo in front of your viewer, it plays with eyes. Either someone assumed that coming down from the stairs or going up. So as I told before, image is something static. You make sense of movement, you make interest. Not only we have also vertical, we have also diagonal lines, and in the form of a curve. So you make sense of movement, you make interest. Again, we have forms, lines, diagonals, sense of movement, and there it is. And this is the classic example of spiral staircases. It also plays with eyes. Either it starts from inside and going outside, or from outside and with its a spiral form it goes inside. You make movement, you make interest. And depth of field. In a two-dimensional picture we do not have depth, but we can make illusion of depth by arranging items, by capturing the forms in sense of depth of the field. So again, diagonal helps us with making depth of field. The viewer can feel something is close and something is further. While we have only two-dimensional picture, we don't have depth, but this is illusion. This makes you make illusion of depth, you make interest. Again, the subject feels there is some bars here, and these are close, and there are something here which are quite further away. And again, you make depth of field, you make movement, you make interest. And these trees also, the viewer can feel that some trees are quite close by and some trees are quite further. You play with eyes, you play with your viewer's eyes to make interest. Or arrangement of humans, these climbers, you can the viewer can feel some people are closer and some people are further with aim of shapes. So shapes are not always explicit, it's sometimes implicit, it is inside. You should people or objects or items makes the shapes implicitly. So these are final remarks. We saw the lines, we saw the shapes, we saw the forms. But the examples I brought were mostly explicit, and as I told, sometimes it's implicit, and you as the photographer should see them and include them in your photo. So when you see a river or some bridge or some walls, think of movement, think of diagonals, think of height, and find the shapes and include them in your picture. And if the shapes or the lines are not very clear, you can ask your subject to move or move them and make the shapes by your own, by moving them, or by just tilting the camera, or just including and excluding some parts. And you can make the shapes by your own, and you make the shapes, you make interesting photos, and this seems quite professional looking photos. This is the end of part 1. Thank you for watching. I will see you later in the next episodes. Have fun and happy shooting.